Hello, BookTube. A little while ago, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club made a tag about yours truly. He looked at the books in his collection and thought, has Steve read these? And he pulled down 8 and talked about them on camera, and it turned out I had not read 2. There were 2 in that list that I hadn't read. But he made his video into a tag, and the tag went viral. Lots and lots of people have done and are still doing this tag, where they essentially let me poke around in the less visited corners of their collection. And the goal, if you want to call it that, is to talk about books in your collection that you don't think I've read. I'm an extremely prolific reader, voluminous, voracious reader. I've been so for a long time, and in a large variety of genres, a large variety of interests. It's not, old friends of mine have pointed out, it's not 100% possible to predict for sure almost anything and say, oh, well, Steve would never read that even if you gave it to him. But another side effect has been to show these fascinating books. Just the books in this tag, in every iteration of this tag, have been so interesting. I've jotted down quite a few that I saw in these tags that I haven't read, or that I have read and want to read again. And there's been a third side effect, of course, human nature being what it is. People have noticed whose tally is the highest of books that I haven't read. And right now, the Has Steve Read It tag is in chaos, because there are 2 winners. Right now, there are 2 people who have 4. Alan Moreton and Hannah's books have 4 apiece. Each of them listed books, and of the books they listed, there were 4 I had not read. So, more than ever before, the Has Steve Read It tag is yearning for someone to come along and knock off the king and queen, because they're uneasy on their throne, sharing that space together. And today, we have another entry. We have another claimant to the throne, and this claimant is no ordinary claimant. How sharper than a serpent's tooth is an ungrateful OGBG. Yes, indeed, BookTube, the moment you have long dreaded and awaited has finally arrived. The members of the OGBG, the Old Geezers book group, have turned on each other. It was only a matter of time until Todd at Todd's Bursting Bookcase, Mark Richardson at Richardson Reads, and Jason Harrigan at Byways in Brooklyn would all throw their hats in the ring, and now they all have. So I'm going to start with Todd at Todd's Bursting Bookcase. And you might think, okay, well, the four book winner spot is certain to go down in flames, because Todd and Jason and Mark have all done enormous library tours. These are people who've been reading voraciously for a huge amount of time, as long as Alan, as long as Hannah. And there's one other factor that might make you think, well, okay, they might do even better than Alan or Hannah. And that is that we've got a bit of Boys from Brazil going on. I mean, there's been a wild variety in the life paths that Todd and Jason and Mark and I have taken, the various things that we've done and people that we've known, the number of times that all 4 of us have married Deb at one point or another. But deep down inside, where we, I think, started off as pretty much clones of each other. And you can elaborate on that kind of cloneship all you want with new interests and new areas of expertise and whatnot, but anyway, one way or another, let's see how that plays out when Todd makes his list. Now, he did 10 books, 5 nonfiction and 5 fiction, and we're going to see how well he does against the ruling king and queen. The first book is The Ice Master by Jennifer Niven, which is a history of the Karluk expedition of 1913, Arctic expedition, the stereotypical Arctic expedition where things went wrong, the ice ground in, there were desperate straits, a small number of survivors were rescued. It's a fascinating story. They all are in their way. This one had dog survivors. They usually don't. And it's a yes, I have read it. I can't say that I wholeheartedly recommend it. I mean, it's great to learn about the expedition, but so is the Wikipedia entry. I can't say that the book stood out to me. Then the next one is a no. The next one is King Zog of Albania by Jason Tomes, which, despite that fantastic title, I have not read. Now I want to. This is one of the benefits of this tag, is that even the books that I haven't read, I'm seeing things that I now want to read, that I want to keep an eye out for. And then the next one is also a no. This is Dark Age by Brian Titley, and it's about an African dictator. And there are a million books on African history that I haven't read, and this is one of them. I haven't read it. Then the next one is Room 1219 by Greg Merritt, and it's a yes. This is I think the latest dramatization of the scandalous incident that ruined the career of the movie star Fatty Arbuckle, where he was alone with a woman, a minor, a very unknown actress. He was alone with her in a hotel during a massive party, and a few days later she was dead. And he never quite worked his way out from under the scandal of that whole thing. And I get the impression that Todd is fascinated by Fatty Arbuckle, and so am I. So I did read this one. This was a yes. Again, I don't 100% recommend it. It is more interesting than The Ice Master, but the story of Fatty Arbuckle could be told in a much better way. It was told fantastically in fiction, in a Christopher Bram novel, but it could be. He is another one of those endlessly interesting figures who is waiting for a modern 21st century 800-page biography. So I'm hoping. I'm hoping. The next one is also a yes. This is 1808. The subtitle is The Flight of the Emperor, and it's by Laurentino Gomes. And it's about the Portuguese emperor fleeing to the New World. He flees to Brazil to avoid Napoleon. Which of us hasn't done that? And I read it. I thought it was interesting. It's as an interesting side note to the big Napoleonic theater, military histories that I read. But once again, I read the book, and it is interesting. But the subject is interesting. The book, I don't quite completely recommend it. I thought like Room 1219 and like The Ice Master, it was competently done, but not thrillingly done. First, we're going to have lots of thrills to make up for these, don't you worry, because Todd couldn't hide his misspent youth from this tag, and I wouldn't have wanted him to, because I think that he and Jason and Mark and I all share the same misspent youth. So his next book is The Neon Bible by John Kennedy Toole. This is a yes. John Kennedy Toole, of course, is the author of A Confederacy of Dunces, with its famous story about his mother shipping it off everywhere and getting rejected after he'd died, and finally becoming a contemporary American comic classic. And the Neon Bible is another book of his. It should have stayed hidden. As far as I'm concerned, it should have stayed hidden. So it's not a recommendation any more than most of these things are. But the recommendations are coming. I don't really recommend the Neon Bible. I think it was mainly meant to ride the coattails of the incredible story of Confederacy of Dunces, which, I might add, Confederacy of Dunces is great. Don't get me wrong. I really like it. I've grown a little tired in my life of people comparing me to Ignatius Reilly, the main character in the book. But I really like the book. And, every time I'm reminded of Confederacy of Dunces, I'm reminded of the fact that it's never had a movie adaptation. And it really should have one. That's kind of strange. But anyway, the next one is Asphalt Warrior by Gary Reilly. This is a no. This is apparently a novel. It's not one that I've ever heard of. Certainly not one that I've ever read. And then the next one is The Complete Dr Nikola by Guy Boothby. Now, Todd in his video showed volume 1, a compendium of I think 2 of the early collections of Dr. Nikola. Dr. Nikola he's bent on world domination. He's a villain. He's basically Professor Moriarty. And the novels start out with him being completely villainous. And as Todd points out in his video, the tenor of whether or not we're supposed to hate him and wish him to lose changes a bit from book to book, from story to story. But it's fascinating, baroque, awful writing. Guy Boothby was an incredible, industrious hack who, if I remember correctly, died really early. I always wonder, you get the impression when you read about him, like in the introduction. I don't have the volume that Todd showed, but I have read the Dr. Nikola books in cheesy mass market paperbacks many times. And I was never tempted to root for Dr. Nikola, okay, because he has a gigantic cat. And so I was never on his team. But when you read any Guy Boothby, you really get... Actually, it's true with a lot of these, with a lot of the reading that I suspect you could find in Todd's collection. You really wonder what he would have done if he'd lived to 90. And maybe more importantly, what he would have done if he'd struck it rich, if one of the million ideas that he threw against the barn door had actually stuck. what would have happened. He is an example to my mind, and there are much more famous examples, including a couple of people he knew, a couple of writers who were friends of his. He's an example in my mind of a writer who I think it would change everything about where he is in literary history if he'd had money. And that's a fascinating thing that not a lot of people consider when they think about great authors or not great authors. But that, anyway, Dr. Nikola is a yes. Guy Boothby, just in general, is a yes. He is, as Todd very diplomatically puts it, Todd doesn't put it this way, he's too nice about it, he's an awful writer. Just awful. All three of these guys that are coming up are pretty much awful, but so entertaining. So then the next one is also a yes. This is The Man in Purple by Johnston McCully, who was the inventor of Zorro, and is a perfect example of what I'm talking about a hack writer, a one new idea a day writer, who threw just machine gun stuff against the barn wall to see what would stick, and with Zorro, of course, something stuck big time. Big time. This author, whose name you don't know, he's not Edgar Rice Burroughs, this author created a character that most people would think is part of American folklore. Most people would think this character is so well established, so universal, that it doesn't have a creator. And that's amazing. And it also mystifies me that, I mean, Zorro, I think, is a Dark Horse comic that's ongoing and has had some fairly heavyweight writer or artists, but it just, there were those Antonio Banderas movies from years ago, but Zorro just can't seem to catch on in the modern era, and I don't know why that is. It's a fantastic story. And as Todd points out in his video, a lot of these hack pulp writers, the theme is the same, which is to steal from the rich and give to the poor, to level what the 1930s would have considered to be epic wealth inequality. Little did they guess. Little did they guess what real wealth inequality would look like, where 10 people have 60% of the money in America. 10 people. 60% of all the money. If you were to liquidate America, if you were to put a price tag on it, 10 people would have 60% of that money. That is wealth inequality, the like of which even Renaissance Italy couldn't dream of. So where are our new Zorros? Where are our new steal from the rich and give to the poor? I don't know. I guess they don't exist at all, because in addition to massive wealth inequality, we also have 2 lawyers for every individual human being on earth. So I'm afraid, sir, you appear to have stolen from the wealthy and given to the poor. That's a violation of several local statutes. But anyway, the long story short, I have read The Man in Purple. It has no literary value whatsoever, rather gloriously so. I do not advise you to read it, but I have read it. And then the last one on Todd's list is also a yes. This is August Derleth. This is the great Solar Pons novels. There were a bunch of them, just a bunch of them. And I read them. Todd showed a gorgeous 2-volume hardcover slipcase of the complete Solar Pons novels. He mentions in his video that of course is not the set that he grew up reading. That when he was a kid, he was reading Solar Pons in ratty mass market paperbacks. So was I, not as a kid. I was a little older than a kid, but it scratched the same itch that I imagine it did for Todd, which is that Solar Pons is Sherlock Holmes. He is Derleth's stand-in for Sherlock Holmes because he wasn't given permission to write Sherlock Holmes novels himself. Now, I think that's a bit of a mistake. I think that was probably a mistake on Arthur Conan Doyle's part. I understand it, but I think it was probably a mistake. I think Todd is correct when he insinuates in his video that the Solar Pons novels actually aren't poorly written. If Arthur Conan Doyle and then his estate had given August Derleth permission to write Sherlock Holmes novels, not only would the world have been spared the slightly self-indulgent drivel of a lot of the Solar Pons material, but they'd also have some, I think, absolutely first-rate Sherlock Holmes novels. They didn't know. I don't think the Doyle estate really guessed what was coming, right? We see it now with Tom Clancy and Robert Parker, where the estate just keeps the detective going. They keep the characters going. If the Doyle estate had done that, I think that Derleth could probably have written them some really first-rate novels. That was what he wanted to do. And I think you can see that in the Solar Pons novels. God, I wouldn't suggest reading a Solar Pons novel, especially if you haven't read all of Sherlock Holmes many times. You should know exactly what the problem of Thor Bridge is off the top of your head. before you read any Solar Pons. But nevertheless, it is a yes. And if you've been keeping track at home, you realize that means Todd's tally is 3. 3 books that Steve has not read. One of which he's going to hurry out and find right away to read, which is the way of this great tag. So the OGBG has had its first foray, and it has not knocked off the king or queen. Todd has scored a 3. So Alan Moreton and Hannah's books still reign supreme, cheek by jowl and getting a little bit testy with each other. So we shall see. We are going to go through the OGBG member by member. So we will go on to that tomorrow and see if that tally can get any higher. Thank you, BookTube.